Hi everyone, a very warm welcome back to MEC-TEC. I've got a smile on my face today. We've got yet another trotter van with us in the MEC-TEC garage. Now this one is the brother of the Stobarts Supervan. So this has come from the Isle of Wight from my mate Mike. And he asked me to have a look at this one. He said, "You sorted out the Stobarts van. I've got an issue with this trotter van now. It won't go into gear. So it'll go into gear when it's off. As soon as you start it and try and go into gear, you won't have any of it." So it looks like we're going to have the gearbox out and find out what's going on. I'm assuming it's going to be clutch related. So as you would have just seen from that little montage, this is a fully fledged trotter van replica. It looks absolutely mega. He's done a superb job on it. I think it's very fitting for Del Boy. It's a very good tribute. Not how my one's going to be. We'll come to that later. But yeah, as trotter tributes go, this one's good. Apart from it not going into gear, so we need to sort that out. So let's get it in the garage. We'll get it up in the air and probably start taking the gearbox out. Obviously inspect the linkage and everything first. Make sure there's nothing bound up on that. I don't think there is, because the pedal moves fine. It's just it won't go into gear. It just resists all the way as if it's sort of not got a clutch there effectively. So we'll get it up in the air. I'm not going to waffle on, and obviously hopefully we'll be able to find the fault and sort it out. Let's crack on. Right, with the van up in the air, there does appear to be a few wiring issues, shall we say, which I may have to look into why this is all hanging down like this. And this is the speedo cable, which is obviously going to be dragging along the floor, so that's not ideal. But well, let's sort out the matter in hand first. So there's the gearbox there, obviously. We are going to need to take that out. In fact, what I'll do in a second, I'll start the van up and just show you what it's doing or not doing, as the case may be. I think obviously the box has got to come out, so we'll start off by taking the prop shaft off there. Then we've got to disconnect the speedo cable. We've got to disconnect the clutch arm, which is this one, and we've got to disconnect that stabilizer rod off the back of the... In fact, no, we haven't got to touch that. That'd be all right. It can stay there, I think, unless we've got to work the engine forward, in which case we might have to take that off, because I don't know whether there's going to be enough room to get the gearbox out. Because I think when we did Dan's with Justin's one, we had to shove the gearbox, the engine forward slightly to get the gearbox out. Just lift it up on a jack and move it forward slightly. So we may have to do that again. We'll see on that. As you can see, this is had the same mod done on the gearbox as my one, but unfortunately with not quite as much finesse. It looks like a load of holes have been drilled and just left like it, in a bit of a jagged shape, so I might have to try and file that a bit round us so it looks a little bit nicer when you look underneath the van. Lots of oil under here, so I think we're going to need new oil seals on that gearbox as well. So yeah, it's had a few people work on it over the years, I'd say, this van, and it's not in probably the safest condition, if I'm honest, as far as wiring's concerned, but there we go. Everything seems to work on it, so there's been quite a few bits added as well under here. You can see these metal brackets that have been added on the rear floor. Whether that's because the rear floor is a little bit weak and they've added them on, I don't know. Again, rear axle is leaking. They all do, to be honest, so it's not anything unusual, you know. So yeah, I think that's going to be the order of business. We'll get the prop shaft off first. In fact, I'll show you what it does. I'll see if I can get it running, show you what it does or doesn't do, as the case may be, and then go from there. Right, I've got the rear prop shaft bolts off, as you can see there. Just come to do the front ones, and as you can see, there's two. Hang on a minute. There's two there, and not two there. So there's actually only two prop shaft bolts holding the front of this prop shaft on, which is a bit dodgy. So we'll have to obviously replace those. That's not good at all. So I'll undo the two remaining front prop shaft bolts, and then obviously we can drop the prop shaft out, and then we can start on getting the gearbox undone. Let's carry on. Right, I just got the speedo cable off, and as you can see, it's not very healthy. That's just this bit in my fingers got left in the gearbox up there, and the cable came off without it, so it shows that was basically kaput. So I don't know if the speedo was working or not in this car or not, but it definitely won't be now because the cable's had it, so it's going to need a new cable. It's been dragging along the floor, as you can see by the look of it anyway, so we'll bin that and get a new cable. Obviously sort that out. while we're here, because obviously it's quite important to have a working speedo. I've got the stabiliser bolt out of the stabiliser rod there. I don't know whether I actually need to remove that or not, but I've took it out just in case. Next thing I'm going to do is get the split pin at the end of this, which is pretty much non-existent anyway. It's only being held on with a fraction, so I'm going to get that off, so that's released off of that. And then I can start looking at probably go inside and get the starter motor out, and then get this rear mount released, and then hopefully that'll aid me in getting this out a little bit easier. Let's carry on. Right, after getting thoroughly annoyed, covered in grease and gearbox oil and anything else you can think of, I finally got this gearbox out. As you can see, it's an absolute mess under here now, where there's been bits flying off everywhere and obviously all the rest of it. So what I've found so far, hopefully you'll be able to see this on camera without getting any lines on the screen, is this bearing in here is very, very worn down to the point where I don't think it was engaging the clutch properly, which is probably why it wouldn't allow it to select any gears. So what I'm going to suggest to the owner Mike is that we get one of the roller type bearings, which is what I've got in my van and what Dan's got in his van, and also Justin's got in his van now as well, because obviously they don't wear down because they've actually got a bearing inside them, which does away with this friction material wearing down, and it actually just spins with the clutch instead to engage it, and obviously it'll make it a lot smoother. So that's what I think I'm going to suggest on that. Obviously I'm going to whip that clutch off up there and make sure that there's nothing wrong with that. It looks okay from what I can see at the moment. Obviously I haven't took it off yet, but it is an LUK. See the little stamp there, so you can get a bit closer on that. See LUK on there. So I'll have a look at see what that friction disc's like inside there. I can't see any broken springs on it, which is what I was possibly considering, because I thought one of these might be broken. I had that before on a car where one of the springs breaks, and obviously it sends all the clutch out of kilter. So I'll buzz that off. It's just held on with these Allen bolts right around the edge. The gearbox itself, just to explain to you, it's got two bolts at the top. You would have seen me do it on my one if you saw my video. Two bolts at the top. Then there's these should be studs in here, but they've wound out instead of the nuts undoing. So you've got a stud, a stud, a stud, another stud down there, another stud there, and then you've got the two bolts for the starter motor, and that's all that holds the actual bell housing to the engine. You have to take the stabiliser bar off, as I showed you. You have to take the clutch rod off, which is that rod there. The stabiliser bar is somewhere over there. There, and I hope that's the crowbar. I don't know where the stabiliser bar's gone, but anyway, oh, there it is there. So that's the stabiliser bar there, and obviously the prop shaft, and the starter motor. So that's that as well. So all that's come off. We've got all that apart. Next thing I'm going to do is buzz that clutch off, make sure that's all right, and if that is okay, then obviously I'll put that back on. If it's knackered, then obviously I'll tell him it needs a new one. Obviously no point in spending money if we don't have to, or if he doesn't have to, I should say. So yeah, so at least we've got the gearbox out now. That's a good start. I was hoping to get that done today. That was my nemesis, getting that out of there, because it is very, very tight to get that out of there. I did take the rear end output shaft flange off of there as well. You can see that there, because it just makes that gearbox a little bit shorter then, and obviously allows it to slip past this bracket up here a bit easier. Yeah, it's a proper pain job this. I'm very, very glad that I did my engine and box with the shell off, put it that way, because it is a pain with the body on, which is why I decided to do what I did with my one in the first place. So there we go. Right, I'm going to get this clutch off, and I'll come back to you and give you another update in a minute. Right, okay, with the clutch off, as you can see there, it is, I would say, probably maybe a third worn, maybe halfway worn. It's not mega close to the rivets, it's got a bit more life left in it, but I have noticed there's a few little sort of, you can see that in the camera there, a few little cracks in there, in the material where the sort of sintered bits have come out, if that makes sense. I was just trying to get that in focus there. You can see that one there next to that rivet. So I'll have to ask Mike, the owner, what he wants to do with the clutch, whether he wants to replace it or whether he wants to go back with this one. There doesn't seem to be anything actually wrong with it as far as broken springs or anything like that's concerned. I'll just see if I can turn it over while I'm here. There we go. The three springs around the edge are all intact, because there's nothing wrong with those. Sometimes these can snap on any clutch, not just Reliance, but yeah, they all look absolutely fine. They're putting good pressure on the clutch friction disc. It's just whether he wants to replace it, because the friction disc being a little bit worn. It's not horrendous. It should probably go on for quite a few miles longer, I would have thought. So I'll have to ask him about that. Now, another thing that I've noticed that we've got to do while we're here, you can see there's 3 quite large drips of oil on the bottom of that sump there. So the rear main seal is obviously leaking, so while we've got the clutch out, I'm going to buzz that flywheel and that rear engine plate off, and we'll replace that rear main seal because that's leaking all everywhere, and as you can see it's leaked all inside the gearbox as well. I don't think that's the gearbox leaking, I think that's the actual rear main seal oil residue sort of blowing back through all those holes in that rear plate and just getting inside that casing, because if you look around the back of this, the housing at the back of the gearbox at the very back is quite dry. It's only around the actual bell housing itself that's wet. So I'm inclined to think that that is actually a rear main seal leaking into the gearbox rather than the gearbox leaking itself. The other end of the gearbox is leaking, I know that, because it's coming out that output shaft seal. So we'll have to change that on that end, but I think this side just wants a good clean up. And obviously we'll clean the back of the engine up and do that rear main seal, and hopefully that will cure that problem as well then. I've got a new one of these bearings coming. I've managed to get, there's not many left now because out of the batch that the guy had made, I'm trying to think of his name. I'll have to let you know his name in a minute, but he's got me another one, so that's handy, so that's really good. So I've got another roller type bearing to go in there, which will obviously aid things and hopefully get a nice smooth clutch engagement again, rather than it be, well, it wasn't engaging because it wasn't pushing it enough. So yeah, that is where we're at the moment. So I'm going to buzz that flywheel off, buzz that rear engine cover off. We'll have a look at that rear main seal. As you can see by them drips on the sump, I'm pretty sure it's leaking everywhere. So we may do a sump gasket on this as well, like we did on the Stobart van, once it's back together and on its mounts, because obviously I've got a jack supporting the engine at the moment where I've got the engine up in the air and forward so I could get the gearbox out. So it is a bit of a faff, but we're getting there slowly but surely. So carry on and come back to you when I've got another update. Right, having got the flywheel and the rear engine plate off, as you can see there, it is looking more like that it's the sump gasket leaking than it is the rear main seal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spray all this down with brake cleaner, clean it all up, and obviously the engine is sitting on a slight angle at the moment where I've got it on the jack, so we'll hopefully be able to see over the next day or so, whilst I'm waiting for some parts, where it's leaking from and if it is the rear main. I don't think it is, because that housing is totally dry, there's no oil on that at all. That is as I took it off, I've not wiped that at all. So I think it is going to be just a sump that needs resealing rather than anything else. But as I say, I will clean it up and obviously go from there and see what's leaking. It might be the housing around that rear main seal, or it might be, as I say, just a sump. So I'll clean it up and we'll see, obviously come back to that and see where we're at, and then we'll know hopefully what's going on. It doesn't look like it's leaking to me though. So yeah, let's carry on. Rightio, we have had a delivery from James at CHG Classics. Thanks to you for sending this out to me. I've got a few parts in here now. We've got a brand new, took all the packaging out, it's up there, look. Brand new clutch kit. So we've got a 3-piece clutch kit. We don't need the bearing though, because obviously we've got that roller bearing to use, which is now turned up. So we've got the clutch kit there. You see those 3 bits there, friction plate, pressure plate. We've got a new rocker cover gasket. We've got a new speedo cable. We've got a new sump gasket in there, and we've got in here, I believe, the axle and gearbox output seals. Yep, and the sump washer seals. So it looks like we've got all the bits we need to get this back on track. Oh, we've got the top gasket for the gearbox underneath the gear stick as well, because that was leaking. So it looks a bit, so I'll order one of those too. So it looks like we've got all the parts we need to get this back together. So first thing we're going to do is get that new clutch bolted in. Then we can get the gearbox cleaned up. And then we can get that put back in. Once we get that put back in and we'll bolt it back together and then on the mounts again, then we can start looking at the sump, because obviously at the moment the engine is supported by a jack on the sump, so on a block of wood. So obviously we can't do anything with that until we get it back on its mount. So clutch is going to be first job, and then we'll carry on with the other bits and bobs in a minute. Let's get under this van and get this job done. Rightio, as you can see there now, I've given the gearbox a real nice clean up. Gone for a whole can of brake cleaner doing it. Anyway, you can see the old seal hat I've popped out here. Doesn't look in too great a shape. And we've got the new one installed in there. It literally just taps in. Use the big socket and fits over it nicely. Tap that in, and that is that new seal in there. So all we've got to do now is pop the top plate off, rather I should say, which is missing a bolt there. I don't know if that's because the hole's thread's gone or what. This one's loose, so no wonder it was leaking. We'll take that off, get the new seal underneath there, new gasket I should say, bolt that down. I'll find another bolt for that hopefully and get that bolted down, and then that is the gearbox basically ready to go back in. All we've got to do then is swap that bearing over in there for the roller one, which we've obviously got in the garage now, and then we should be alright on that side of things. So I'll get that done, and then obviously we can get underneath the van, get a few things cleaned up under there, and then we can carry on, hopefully get this gearbox back in and get it driving again. That is the plan. Let's carry on. Rightio, I just thought I'd show you why I've got these 3 bearings off. This is obviously the one that came off the van. You can see the thickness of that in comparison to a new carbon one is quite a difference. Hang on a minute, get these side by side and you'll be able to see what I mean. You can see the thickness difference between the two of those is quite massive, which is probably why the clutch wasn't obviously working, because there was no bearing left and it wasn't pushing the clutch in far enough to release it. So that is that's the new type carbon bearing that comes with the clutch kit, but we're not going to be using that. We're going to be using this one, which he's got from a guy called Robin Human on Facebook. He had a batch of these made especially for this application. As you can see, it's a really nicely made part, and it's got a proper roller bearing in there, so this actually turns. Rather than it being a friction type bearing, this is fixed on a carbon one, and obviously it just wears the carbon away over time. In theory, this one should last for a lot longer because it is a proper roller type bearing. I've got this on my van, Dan's got it on his van, and Justin, when we did the clutch on his van, has also got it on his van as well. So we have used these on a few vans. I mean, I've not used my van yet, but the 2 that we have used them on have been absolutely fine. So that is what we're going to use. We're going to get that fitted on the obviously on the clutch fork itself. It uses these 2 little springs to hold it in. We'll get that put on. I'm actually going to leave the top gasket for the minute. I've got it here. I'm going to leave that for the minute. I'm going to wait until I actually get the gearbox back in the van, because then we can take that top plate off. We can refill the oil from the top rather than from the side, which is a lot easier. We'll just have the fuel port open on the side so we know the level's right when it starts coming out the side a bit. And we can change that gasket at the same time. So we'll do that bit once it's back in the van, but obviously we've got to put this bit on whilst the gearbox is apart. So I'll get that put on, and then we can get the new clutch put on the flywheel, get this box back in the van. Let's carry on. Just thought I'd show you this while I've got the box out as well. It's a little bit easier to see. Obviously whoever's done the modifications on this box, they've done the same modification I did on mine, but not executed maybe quite as neatly. As you can see there, you can see all the drill hole marks around the edge of that hole. So I may just run a belt sander around that just to try and neaten it up a little bit, because it does look a bit hacked, shall we say. So I might have a little go at that, see if I can just make that look a bit more pretty before we put it back in the van. It's not going to have any sort of detriment to it working or anything like that. It's just an aesthetic thing more than anything else, but we'll have a little look, see what we can do with that, and obviously I'll show you once I've done it. There we go. I know it wasn't strictly necessary, but I've tidied that hole up. It's now more hexagon than it is a hole, but obviously I had to work with the shape I had there, so I've just used a burr in a drill, that one there, gone around it, smoothed it all off nice. That just looks a little bit nicer when you look under the van. It doesn't look so sort of hacked up, as should I say. So yeah, that will be that bit done. Now we can, I've just washed the bell housing back out again to get all the metal filings out of it. I think I've got most of them out now. Well, I say metal filings, it's only aluminium, so it's only fine, very fine stuff, but it's all got out of there now. So our new bearing, which is here, can then slot in on there like so. We'll put the 2 spring-loaded little clips on, retaining clips on it, and then we should be good to carry on. Top banana. Right, there we go, that is the gearbox back in, all clean, rear mounts bolted up, the gearbox is bolted back to the engine, the front mounts are sitting back on their perches again. I've just got to tighten up the nuts on the actual mounts themselves. That's all sorted out. I've got to do something with this fuel line because this was just hanging here when I first got under the van. I don't like that very much. Also, you can see that the brake light switch there is now plugged back in with the original 2 plugs. For whatever reason, someone had decided to put in 2 link wires to lengthen them, but for no reason whatsoever. So I have no idea why that was done, but they're all hanging down as well. So I've took them off and I've just plugged the original plugs back in, so they should be, obviously I'll check it works, but they should be absolutely fine. So yeah, I've got to do something with this fuel line. It's actually been run underneath this metal bar which runs along the chassis, which to my mind is daft because there's a gap above it that you can get that fuel line through, and then you're going to have this cable tie here holding it on. So I'm going to probably re-thread all that over the top of that bar, so at least it's out of the way, and then I'll cable tie it further up here so that it's cable tied in tight to the chassis, and then just cuts across to where the obviously engine is. And that will look a lot neater, and obviously it won't get caught on things then, because if it's hanging down like that, you can see it's lower than the chassis, so you could quite easily catch that on something and rip the fuel line in half, which obviously you don't want. So we'll do something with that obviously once I've finished off with getting the clutch and everything sorted out. I think the next thing I'm going to do is have a look at this rear output shaft, the flat plate that bolts in there, the prop shaft bolts to. It's quite pitted, and I think that's probably why it wasn't sealing very well. Obviously we've got our new seal in there now, so I don't want to wreck that new seal. So I'm going to give that a little clean up with some wet and dry. I'm just trying to see if I can see where I put it. I put it out here somewhere, probably under a pile of junk somewhere, I don't know. Hang on, let me get up off the floor. I'm getting too old for this. Oh, there it is. Right, lean on it. So you can see there, it's a little bit pitted. You can see the clean ring around it where obviously the old seal's been rubbing, but I don't know whether the old seal has cleaned its own path and that's what caused it to start leaking again or what. But I'm going to give that a little clean up with some wet and dry just to improve it as best I can, and then we'll get that bolted back in with its locking washer and everything in there, and then we can probably move on to getting the, we're going to have to do the rear axle seal next, because obviously we can't do that, or we've got to do that I should say, before we can put the prop shaft back on, because otherwise you can't get the pinion seal out to do that. So we'll probably do that next. It's all going rather well. Let's carry on. Right, there we go. I've spent a bit of time on this. Give it a good old clean. I used a belt sander with a very fine grip belt in it and went very lightly. I've got it mounted in the vise over there, you can see. Just about see that there. And then after that I went over it with some wet and dry with some WD-40, then a scotch pad with some WD-40, then some 000 grade wire wool. And as you can see, it's balled it up lovely and shiny again. There are a few still little pit marks in it, but nothing like it was. So hopefully that should seal really nicely, so we can get that bolted back on the car now, or the van I should say, and then we can get onto this rear axle seal. Let's carry on. Rightio, just on the bench here, as you can see, I've got the rear axle pinion seal, or plate off I should say, because the seal on this one actually goes in from the back. This is the original one, as you can see there. It was actually a leather seal which is quite worn around the inside edge. You can just about see it in there. It has pretty much had it, so I had to hammer that out from the back and then put the new one in, obviously the same way, reverse of what I just did. So that is a nice new seal in there. So I'm going to put a little very fine smear of RTV around this face here. There is a rubber, sorry not a rubber, a metal ring that goes inside here as well, which I think is probably either a spacer or like almost like a big crush washer. I'm not really sure, to be honest, but I'm going to put a little bit of sealant around that and get that bolted back on. We can get the axle cleaned up then, hopefully, because hopefully it won't leak any more oil, and then we can get the prop shaft back on, and then we can start looking at getting all the oil and everything changed. Top banana, it's going really rather well. I don't want to jinx it, but I'm having quite a good day so far, apart from banging my head on the ramp. That hurt quite a lot. There we go, let's carry on. Right, before I put this pinion seal back on, I'm actually going to drain the oil because it's still dripping out of here, and obviously I want to get a good seal on that, so I'm going to just crack this off and hopefully get all the old oil out of it. Thought that was the right size spanner, but apparently not. Hold the line, caller. Let's try that. That's better. 13/16 it is, just so you know. Getting dripped on here. That's not good. Oh God, that's tight. Been on there for about a million years, probably. The axle stopped leaking on me. There it goes. Right. See what mank we get out of this, if any. Oh, well, there's no water in it, which is good. So we'll let that drain out. It's very grey. We'll let that drain out, and at least then I can wipe this all clean. Get that seal back on with a bit of RTV, as I said. And then we should be good to refill it again after. Let's carry on. Right, as you can see there, I've spent a bit of time cleaning up that axle. Now, it has been painted black in the past, which is why it's a bit flaky on the side, but it has got no grease or mank on it anymore, which is good. I've also cleaned up that mating surface, as you can see, with a scotch pad, and I've done the same on this housing as well. Cleaned that up with a scotch pad, so it's got the new seal in there already. So all I'm going to do now, that just show you quickly as well, that's that ring that goes inside there. It sits up against the bearing, so it's like a little sort of spacer ring, or whatever you want to call it. So there, that just sits in there like that. I'm going to smear some RTV around there, just a very, very light coat, just to give it a little seal. Bolt that back on, and then that is the rear axle, obviously complete, apart from refilling it with oil, which I've got to go and get in a minute. So that's that job done, and then we can get the prop shaft back in. Let's carry on. Right, as you can see there now, the prop shaft is back on, and I've actually got 4 nice new bolts. I don't know if you can see them up there, but there's 4 nice new bolts in this end of it now, which obviously I only had 2 in before, so I don't know if you can see that in there. I'll get it on camera. There we go. So you can see there's 4 nice new bolts in there with nylock nuts. So that is all done. Now I was going to refill the axle next, but I think what I might do now is actually drain the sump on the engine. We'll get that sump off, get all that cleaned out, and then we can refill everything all in one go. We can do the rear axle, gearbox and engine all in one go. I've now got all the oil, as you can see there. I've got the GL4 EP8090 oil for the axle and gearbox, and I've got the 2050 Halfords Classic oil for the engine. We've got a new filter which is up the other end of the garage as well, so we'll swap that over at the same time. Now you'll see I haven't fitted 3 bits back yet, which is the stabiliser bar, the clutch linkage and the starter motor. That's basically because it's a little bit easier to get to this side of the sump with those bits off. So I've left them bits off for now. We'll get that sump drained out, obviously get it all unbolted, clean it all out, put a new gasket on, reseal all that so that hopefully it won't leak anymore, and then we can start refilling stuff hopefully. Right, let's see what glorious mank we get out of this one. Hopefully it won't be too bad. I've cleaned my bowl out so we can see how dirty it is when it comes out in the bowl. Ready, go. Oh, well, it's not too bad. Very black, but it's not doesn't look sludgy or anything like that. What's this plug like? Bit of sludge on the end of the plug. Well, but obviously we're going to have this sump off, so that will obviously get rid of all the sludge. Once we get that off, we can obviously clean it all out nice, and it'll be absolutely like new again inside. So that will be absolutely superb. So I'm going to let this drain out, and then I'll buzz the sump off. I'll come back to you and show you what we've got inside when we get it off. Right, there we go with the sump off. My initial reaction is this engine looks very good inside indeed. Actually, very clean. There's no sludge in there around the engine at all. I'll just pull the camera out and show you inside the sump. You can see obviously in there, got the rest of what's left of the oil, and really there's a very light bit of sludge on the bottom, but nothing really. It's really good. So I'm quite impressed with that. So I'm going to get all that cleaned out. We'll get all this old gasket off, which hopefully shouldn't take too much to get that off. We'll clean it all up. Gasket's coming off anyway. Look, we'll clean it all up, and then we'll reseal it with some RTV both sides of this new gasket that we've got. That will hopefully prevent it from leaking again like it was before. And yeah, we should be good to put that back on and get some fresh oil in the engine. That is after we've changed the filter. So I'm going to give this a clean and I'll come back to you in a second. Right, I just spent a bit of time cleaning up all that mating surface for the sump. As you can see, it's nice and clean and smooth all the way around. Got the remnants of any of the old gasket off. There wasn't a lot on there, so that's good. Let me just get out from under the car. Hang on a second, and I'll show you the sump. There's the sump, all nice and clean. I've gone around the edge with a wire brush and a drill to clean off any rust that was on there, and then I've gone over it with brake cleaner and a scotch pad, so that's nice and clean now. Got the bolts soaking in that little pot of degreaser there, so they'll be nice and clean when they go back on. So next step now, I'm going to get some of the old RTV. I'm going to give it a nice sort of smear around that, then put the new gasket on, smear on the top of that as well, and hopefully that should cure any of our leaks that we had before. We've got a new bung, or a new not bung, a new O-ring to go on the drain plug there, which is over there somewhere. I think it's just there. We'll put that on as well. Change the oil filter over, and then we can stick some new oil in it, and it should be absolutely marvellous. Looking at it, I think this engine is actually a really good engine by the looks of it. There was, when I cleaned it out, there was actually no sludge in there at all. In fact, it was just sort of manky oil really. It wasn't really sludge at all, so that was really good. So yeah, very healthy engine by the looks of it. Lovely. Right then, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there for this episode on MEC-TEC. I have run out of time this week to do any more on the little van. We have made some brilliant progress on it though, and it is very close to being back on the road where it should be. So, in the next episode, we will obviously be driving it, make sure it's all working alright, and we'll be finishing off all the little bits and bobs, getting all the oil refilled, rocker cover gasket, speedo cable, all the little bits and bobs that we need to finish off. We'll do in the next video, and maybe we'll try and tidy up a bit of that wiring underneath, obviously as we go. And I have done a little bit of that as we've gone along already, as you would have seen. So hopefully it will be less of a fire hazard, shall we say? It will be less of a fire hazard once we finish. So we'll just tidy a few bits and bobs up as we go along. So yeah, if you do like what you see, make sure you do the 4 things for me. Like, subscribe, share, and hit that notification bell. I'll tell you every time I upload a video. Remember, it's all free, it doesn't cost you a penny, and it really helps me out on the channel. So if you could do those 4 things for me, that would be absolutely superb. Remember, I have got Instagram, MEC_TEC1985, and I have got as Facebook, MEC-TEC as well, for little sneak peeks during the week of what I'm up to. And all there's left for me to say is thank you very much for watching, and if you want to join me soon for more automotive adventures, I'll see you again next time. Cheers guys.